And welcome to the Sedona Forum session on defending democracy. I'm David Kramer, a senior fellow at Florida International University, and I have the great privilege of having a conversation here with Nathan Law, who is a young activist from Hong Kong, currently studying at Yale for a master's degree. And during the umbrella movement in 2014 in Hong Kong, Nathan was one of 5 representatives who took part in the dialogue with the government debating political reform. Some of his colleagues back in Hong Kong, including Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, have been very active in forming democracy networks within Hong Kong and beyond. And Nathan was elected to the Legislative Council, but his seat was overturned in July 2017 following Beijing's constitutional reinterpretation, despite some strong international criticism. Nathan, it's really terrific to have you joining us here today. Grateful for your taking the time to do this. If I can, let me start with a question that reflects the theme of the Sedona Forum, and that is defending democracy. Why is it important to you to defend democracy in Hong Kong?
Thank you for the invitation, David, and thank you for the invitation from the Sedona Forum. For me, I've been devoted myself into the fight for democracy for the past 7 years since I was a student leader in 2014 in the umbrella movement. It means a lot to me because in Hong Kong, we've been one of the freest city in Asia, even though we have never had democracy, but democracy was promised by Beijing in the 1997 hangover, which the sovereignty of Hong Kong was handed back from the British government to the Chinese government. And it is a guarantee for Hong Kong people that we can elect our city's leader and we can determine our future. And only by doing so, the leader of the city will act on the benefits of its people rather than the benefits of the Chinese communist regime, the one-party dictatorship. But for now, it's so obvious that with the blockage of the democracy and also tightening control on Hong Kong's freedom, the leader of the city is a complete puppet, controlled by the Chinese communist regime. And it once again shows that our pursuit for democracy is right. Only by having a leader that genuinely elected by the people so that they are responsible to the people and they will be held accountable. So I think this is very crucial reasons why we're fighting for democracy in Hong Kong.
So let me push you a little further on this, because obviously the struggle has not been easy, to say the least. And as you mentioned, the Chinese Communist Party and local officials in Hong Kong have been cracking down against you and your fellow citizens and your fellow activists. And as I mentioned at the outset, you, of course, were forced to flee Hong Kong, while a number of your colleagues who stayed behind have been arrested and sent to prison, including Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow. The struggle obviously is not over. Give me a sense of your interactions with your colleagues on what drives them, what gets them out there to push, to challenge the authorities, risking their freedom, your freedom, if not, sadly, your lives in some tragic cases.
Yeah, it's definitely heartbroken to see all my friends in Hong Kong, including Joshua Wong, Anna Chow, and Ivan Lam, being arrested and jailed for months or possibly for years. In Hong Kong, most, if not all, prominent activists and politicians from the pro-democracy camp are now in trial, in jail, or in exile. So the past 2 years has been severe crackdowns on the pro-democracy camp in Hong Kong, and many of us suffer in different sense. And I think the reason why all of us, even though we understand that we'll face huge risk, but we still commit ourselves into the struggle of democracy and fighting against basically the largest and most powerful authoritarian regime in the world, is because we love our city, we love our people, and the suffering of the others, of our fellow Hong Kong citizens, are our sufferings. And it becomes the commitment of us to help them and to build up a better Hong Kong for the people who have suffered. I think that is very powerful because I think the sense of community, the sense of belonging, and the sense of purpose aroused, especially in the struggle of 2019 protest, where our city, there had been 1 million, 2 million people marching down to the streets and tens of thousands of people being arrested. A lot of them are being locked in jail for years. And we share the same pursuit, which is fighting for democracy. So I think for all of us, our commitment really originated from our ideas about democracy, but also for the benefits and the well-being of our fellow Hong Kong citizens. And this is purely because we love the city. This is where we grow, and this will always be the most important place in our hearts.
There does seem to be a generational characteristic of the movement. You and your fellow activists are obviously on the young side, younger certainly than I am. It's not to say that there aren't older people in Hong Kong who are joining you, but how do you sustain your optimism and positive attitude in the face of such diversity? Is there a generational factor involved in any of this?
I wouldn't say that I'm an optimistic activist. A lot of us are like we understand the reality. We realize how difficult the fight would be, and we won't easily say that we can concur in simple terms. It's definitely an uphill battle. It's a David versus Goliath battle, and possibly it's much more difficult than any of us could have expected before we embark our political journey. But at the end of the day, we believe that if we don't fight, then there's no possibility for change. Even though if we fight, then the possibility won't be large. Possibly that will come with a lot of sacrifices. But at least we tried. And I think the sense of willing to take risk and fight for our future is definitely an important element in our movement. And I think it not only creates a wave of changes, a wave of protesters, but it also reshapes each one of us. From the action of protesting, we are actually liberating ourselves from our hearts. It means that we are free people. We're people who dare to fight for freedom, and we believe in innate human rights of every single one of us. So I think, I do think we are having a short-term pessimistic future. But on the other hand, as an activist, I don't think I'm entitled to lose hope. As long as we resist, as long as we fight back, we'll never give up. We'll continue the role of democracy. And I do believe that in decades' time, I may have the opportunity to go back to a free and democratic Hong Kong.
I certainly hope you will, and I hope that will be sooner rather than later. Let me ask you, do you when looking at the globe, there is obviously a struggle underway across the globe for democracy and liberty, freedom, and human rights. Do you draw lessons or inspiration from any other movements, or is what you and your fellow activists are trying in Hong Kong, is that simply indigenously driven?
Well, I think the context of different protests are so different. So sometimes we can hardly transplant the tactics or any strategies directly from elsewhere. At least for me, when I was in jail in 2017, I read a lot of autobiography of protest leaders or giants in the histories like Dr. King, Mandela, Gandhi. And the things that I learned wasn't about their strategies, about how they preserve a strong mentality. For those people, some of them locked in jail for years, being arrested for a couple dozen times, and they've committed themselves their lives and a strong iron-like mentality to fight for democracy. And I think that kind of mindset is very encouraging when you are in difficult times. For example, when you are locked in jail, you need to learn from these great people to discern how they go through their much more difficult period of time than yours. and you have to travel through this your own difficult time peacefully and calmly, so that you can actually perform your role as an inspirational figure to the people and not being cracked by the government because of these persecution. So I think, on that regards, I learned a lot from the great people in history. And for me, I really do hope that I have that characteristic of facing difficulties while being very calm and normal-minded, and see it as part of the journey, and to continue to go even though facing all these repression.
A lot of this crackdown and rollback by the authorities in Beijing and local authorities started before the Biden administration came into office this past January. But what would you like to see the U.S. do, the Biden administration do, recognizing it has a full plate domestically, it has a full plate internationally, but what is it that the Biden administration could do, and maybe even extend that beyond the Biden administration? What is it that the international community can and should be doing?
So the China policy in the US is one of the very few, if not the only one, issues that has certain continuity in between two administrations. And for me, the Biden administration continues to be very assertive and really aware of the threats China poses to the world, and continue to adopt a strategically right policy on that regard. And we could really see that the multilateral approach indeed played well in terms of coordinating actions from allies, putting pressure on China through international system, and to restore the legitimacy of the US, of its diplomatic influence and of its democratic influence on the global stage. So I think we are seeing a very strong China policy coming out from the Biden administration. But I think in the future, we definitely have to work more with allies, especially in the EU and in some very important Asian democracies, to ensure that they are not like hedging towards China, and to uphold the human rights and democratic values as front and center towards their diplomatic policy, and to counter that authoritarian expansion influence from China.
Do you think that the government in Beijing could be influenced by a stronger position when it comes to Hong Kong from the international community?
Well, before we go into that questions, we have to realize why China has a drastic change on Hong Kong's policy. On the one hand, Hong Kong was first being seen as the example of a one country, two system to Taiwan. But recently, the hope of having a so-called peaceful reunification with China is dim, because in recent years, the Taiwanese election has shown that the Taiwanese people, they don't really buy into the narrative from China. And so that kind of example role of Hong Kong has gone. And on the other hand, when Xi Jinping took his power in 2012, 2013, he immediately started to be very aggressive and very self-confident. And he eventually made the confidence doctrine into the constitution, and make sure that they have the path of confidence and confidence towards their political system, which means that they don't have to see Hong Kong as a sign of them, as a progress to catch up the Western system. They don't feel necessary anymore to catch up the West. Instead, they develop their own authoritarian system and believe that it is much more superior. So on that regard, the sign of progress of Hong Kong, for now, the role of that is already gone. So combining these two factors, there aren't really much factors for China to pull off its authoritarian influence in Hong Kong. And that's why there has been a continuing ways of repression on our freedoms and the nature of the city's cosmopolitan and international system ongoing. So I think in order to counter that that front, in order to restore the freedoms and possibly fight for democracy in Hong Kong, we indeed have to let Beijing to realize that they have to abide by the rule-based international order, and whenever a human rights violation that they commit into, there will be a relative consequence on that. And most importantly, that kind of authoritarian model of ideology or governance, these so-called confidence has to be cracked, and we have to restore the legitimacy of democracy. Because if we do not stop the rise of authoritarianism, we'll only be seeing more and more authoritarian city or even totalitarian regimes reoccur in the world, and it really threatens lives of people and hampers the legitimacy of democracy. So I think the issue of Hong Kong and the threat of China really are the very important problems and questions, and we have to tackle it in all the capacity that we can.
Well, Nathan, I know these are challenging times for you and your friends and your colleagues, your family, fellow citizens in Hong Kong. And I just want to take this opportunity to wish you and everyone there the very best and restoration of what was a real thriving, free city. And that is something that I think everyone looks to as inspiration. And we also look to you for inspiration too, not to put pressure on you, but what you and others have done in Hong Kong stands as an amazing model for the rest of the world, that freedom is worth fighting for. Defending democracy is something we all should engage in. And so let me salute you and your colleagues for your courage, for your determination, for your commitment. It is truly inspiring, and we're really grateful for this opportunity to talk with you here today. And I wish you the very best, both in your personal pursuits and a quick and free return to Hong Kong very soon.